Hey folks, good afternoon. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started here. For those of you I don't know, my name is Erin Brown. You probably see many emails from me these days about the teach-in. Welcome to Advocacy 101. We're joined today by Colin Martinez Longmore from Network and James Luisi from St. Ignatius here in Cleveland. So today we're going to go over sort of the basics for prepping for your meetings, your advocacy meetings at the teach-in. Colin will get us started, and then James will provide, somewhat of a delegation leader perspective as well for those of you who are here as delegation leaders, getting your students perhaps or other folks in your delegation ready for Advocacy Day at the teach-in. So just as a reminder, a few of other upcoming things. Tomorrow at this time, we will have a webinar specifically to dig into environmental policy. And then on Thursday for migration policy. So 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow and on Thursday for that. We'll also have recordings in the case that you can't make it or folks in your group can't make it. You can revisit those recordings. So we'll aim to get those out to you via email by Friday. And then the final piece too is just as a reminder, there's an opportunity for your delegations to sign up for a small group advocacy training with an experienced trainer, an advocate on Saturday, October 22nd. So that's the first day of the teach-in. Those are pre-sessions. So you can do that in the afternoon before our first general session for the teach-in begins. So just know too that if, even though you're here today participating in this Advocacy 101 webinar, we would still encourage you to sign up for that small group advocacy training if you're able. It's a really good opportunity for sort of role playing and putting into practice some of the things that we'll be talking about today. But from here, I'll hand things over to Colin and James to get us started.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me well? Just a thumbs up. I just connected a new mic. Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, excellent. All right. Well, good afternoon or good, I don't know about morning anymore, but depending on what time zone you're calling in from, very happy to be here with you all today. My name is Colin Martinez Longmore. I'm with Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice. We're based out of Washington, D.C. And I'm very happy to be joined here as well by James Luisi, campus minister at St. Ignatius High School. I don't know if, James, you want to say a few words, introduction?
Yeah, hi, everyone. As Colin said, James Luisi, I'm a campus minister at St. Ignatius. Many moons ago, I had the opportunity of working as a government associate with Network Lobby. So that's where I first got my real taste of doing advocacy, and I'm a big fan of what we do with the Ignatian Family Teach-in. So I'm grateful to be here with you all to prepare our delegations for this important advocacy that we do.
Definitely. So thank you all once again. We're going to dive into some tips and tricks on advocacy just in general, and also specifically for the teach-in for your advocacy day. If you have any questions, please feel free to send those in through the chat. Since I'm sharing my screen, I probably won't see them until afterwards, but we'll be happy to get to them at the end as well. So feel free to send any questions there through the chat. And if I'm ever talking too fast or you want to hear a point repeated again, just raise a hand or something or get my attention, and I'll be happy to repeat. But as a quick overview today, we're just going to be talking about faith-based advocacy as an overview, just diving into it in general, what lobbying is specifically, and then getting into some practicals. What are the tactics to have an effective lobby visit on the Hill? Maybe this is your first time, maybe you've done it before. I would say show a raise of hands, but I can't really see everyone here. So if this is your first time doing any kind of legislative visit with a member, congratulations, we're really excited for you. And if you're coming back as maybe a veteran or so, we're very grateful to have you be part of this as well. From there, we're going to talk about some pro tips, as well as hear some perspectives from our delegation leader that James is going to share. And then we'll briefly cover in an overview some of the documents we'll be using, like the meeting planning document and some talking points. But all right, with that, we'll dive into the first little piece. Just a quick note of introduction about Network. We educate, organize, and lobby for economic and social transformation. a Catholic social justice lobby started by Catholic sisters 50 years ago, and continuing to do that work open to all who share our passion for a more just society. I'm clearly not a Catholic sister, but we work with them. So in terms of advocacy, I'd love to see into the chat if you have the availability to submit into the chat. Type in an answer. What's something that comes to mind for you when you think of the word advocacy or when you think of the word advocate? I'd love to see some answers in the chat if you could type that in, just as like a word association. Speaking up, I like that. Asking, support, this is great. Yeah, voice, that's great. Defending a cause, voice for the voiceless, on behalf of a group or person, progress stories. Oh, these are great answers, y'all. Thank you so much. Standing up for what you believe in, representation. These are great. Yes. Thank you for sharing. Keep them coming if you can. When we think of advocacy, we can just break it down into the actual word in itself, right? The idea of joining in a voice with it. I know I saw voice in there somewhere. And we can really think of advocacy as us joining our voice with those. So we can make sure that the needs of those are brought to the people that have the power to create change. That's the definition that Network uses, but there's plenty of other definitions you might hear, like public support for, promotion of, and championing of policies that will benefit and improve the lives of a certain population, as well as any type of actions that can aim to influence the decisions within any kind of system or institution, whether that's political, economic, or social. But advocacy is essential in any kind of political action that you take. And we can all participate in it. It's not something that is locked away from some folks. Everyone has an opportunity to participate in advocacy. Specifically in terms of faith-based advocacy, where I think ISN does a great job, where what we try to do as well at Network and in your institutions as well, I imagine. When you take the perspective of faith-based advocacy, you can think of the idea of leading with values, morals, personal stories that really lead our work, not necessarily facts and figures at the jump, right? And we're going to talk about this a little bit later when you talk about storytelling skills in your advocacy, in your legislative visit that you're going to be having. Because again, your job is not to be a policy expert at the end of this, but your job is to lead with your values, with your personal lived experience. That is your personal expertise that you have that is so valuable to your members and that they want to hear about that. So faith-based advocacy is also about approaching legislators with compassion, openness, and what at Network we call sister spirit, where you're open, but you're still dogged and even stubborn at times about issues of justice, but with openness. So this isn't about confrontation. It's not about catching someone in a gotcha moment, but it's about building relationship, because ultimately relationships is what can change and create great social movements. Prayer is part of our public events, which I know will be part of the advocacy witness as well on that Monday after the teach-in. And just keeping in mind the long-term work. This is something that will take a long time to build. You know, as I said, being builders of a future, not necessarily our own, but that we can see planting seeds for the future as well. So at Network, we when you think of advocacy, we have 3 pillars of advocacy: the education component, the organizing component, and the lobbying component. And we're going to focus specifically on the lobbying component because that's what we're prepping us for during our advocacy day after the Ignatian Family Teach-in. So again, each of these are important. I would note that there are arrows pointing in every direction. So it's not a baseball diamond where you start at one place and you move to the other. So lobbying isn't like the last step that you have to get to once you've figured out how to do lobbying correctly. You can start anywhere of these and move into any of the others. But we're going to focus in on lobbying today specifically. So lobbying, very simply put, lobbying, we can think of it as educating and influencing our elected officials so that they'll either support or oppose any legislation that can make our country a more just society. I have some examples of some people doing lobbying type of work. These are congressional hearings, not what we will be doing. We'll be having legislative meetings with members and staffers, but I think Seth Rogen is doing something on Alzheimer's, Simone Biles very recently with the scandal with the US gymnastics, Taraji P. Henson as well, and of course, Elmo. But all this does require a process of providing and gathering information on an issue. And part of that is what your prep work will be as you go into your legislative visit, so that you can have a successful and effective visit, feeling that what you're bringing in is something that the offices really do want to hear from. So the lobby visit itself. Lobby visits allow you to make direct contact with your member of Congress. It's great because you can build relationships with your member of Congress and staff. Again, if this is your first time, this is not about going in there with like a golden key visit that is going to change everything after that one visit. What you can think of this lobby visit of as the first step in building a relationship that you can continue, not just in DC, right, at the Capitol office, but that you can continue back at home at your in-district office. Those relationships are powerful and are great ways that change can happen. So this is a great way to begin that. It establishes you, the constituent, as a valuable resource on the issue. Oftentimes we think of lobbyists as people in like these suits that are, living out in DC or in New York or in a major metropolitan area, that are very high powered and all. But honestly, anyone can be a lobbyist. Anyone can lobby on an issue. And if you are a constituent, meaning you're someone that your member represents, you have so much more power than a person who is trying to lobby and is not a constituent, because ultimately you hold the power in voting them in, in voting them out, and in sharing what are the needs of the community. So you as a constituent are a valuable resource that when the offices hear that you're coming in as a constituent, as someone who they represent, either in their state or in their district, they're very excited because they want to hear from you. It also allows you to learn where your member of Congress is on an issue and to learn more about what's happening in Congress. A lobby visit is more than just a time where you get set up and then you say a monologue and then you leave. It should be a conversation where there's your part in communicating, but then you're also listening to what the member says, to what the staffer is telling you as well. You can gather some really insightful information to the mentality of the office, of where they're coming from, of maybe the different pieces that they all have to juggle. And it can be very helpful in also just gathering information. So maybe you're meeting with a member who won't be totally receptive to the policy ask that you have, but it could still be a big win if you are able to gather information, build relationships, and establish yourself as a constituent. So there's many ways to win, if you will, in these lobby visits, rather than just hoping that your policy ask will be completed right then. All right. I am not going to have anyone read this because the letters are really small, but I'm going to explain this chart to y'all. This is from the Congressional Management Foundation, which does a lot of research on staff on the Hill. And it asked staffers, if your member, let's say your senator or your representative, has not arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how much influence would any of these following strategies to the Capitol Hill office have on his or her decision, right? And we could see the light blue is some positive influence. The dark blue is a lot of positive influence. And if you start from the very bottom, you have like a form email message. Those are the ones that, like, maybe you see on Instagram that you could just swipe up and it fills out your information for you, and you just gotta click send or something, right? Those have some positive influence. But as you go through and you move all the way up, when you get to the very top, the one that has the most positive influence that the staffer said, this will actually sway my member the most, is an in-person issue visit from a constituent. That's you. That's what you all will be doing. You'll be using one of the most effective strategies, and that's being an in-person visit as a constituent to the member's office. That's very powerful in swaying the decision of a member. And I do want to note that the in-person also does equal in COVID times virtual, because this was done a couple of years ago, but even if you can't meet in person, a virtual visit from a constituent to the office is super powerful, and the offices love to hear from constituents. So it's important to know who we're meeting with. We're going to be in Washington, D.C. We're going to be on Capitol Hill, on the mall, seeing all this. We're going to walk into their offices, and we're going to be meeting with Hill staff, the staff on the Hill, on Capitol Hill. That's different than the staffers that you might see in your state capitol, in your in-district office, right? These members have offices in the local communities, and they have offices in the Capitol, on the Hill. So you want to know a little bit about who you're meeting with when you're meeting with the Hill office, because it's different, right? Staffers that work on the Hill often specialize in a few issues. They are people who went to grad school on certain issues, whether it's criminal legal system reform, whether it's the environment, whether it's the economy. They're specialized oftentimes in specific issues. They oftentimes are involved in writing the pieces of legislation, and they're often those policy strategists, right? The big difference here is that oftentimes folks on the Hill, they are not from the home district or even the state of that representative. So if you're from Ohio and you're meeting with Senator Sherrod Brown, you could be meeting with a Hill staffer who most likely will not even be from Ohio, but he's a policy expert. And that's why they have him in the office, because it's important to have those people that are informed. So knowing that you're going to be meeting with people who are experts in the policy, but who don't know much about the community that they're originally from, generally, right? That's what you're able to bring in that is so valuable. You don't have to be a policy specialist out of all this. You don't have to be an expert, but you do get to bring your expertise, your lived experience, your stories, so that they can learn why the legislation that you're advocating for is important to you and your community, because they want to know that. And oftentimes they don't get that type of information. And I say that because that's on this chart from the Congressional Management Foundation as well. The dark blue is how often an office receives a type of information, and the light blue means how, the dark blue is how helpful something is, and the light blue bars is how frequently they receive that type of information. So if you see at the very top, the focus, it's information about the impact that some kind of bill or legislation would have on a district or on a state. That is very, very helpful and valuable information, but they only receive that type of that type of information 9% of the time. There's a huge disconnect. They really want that information of the real stories of how policies affect their state, their community, and that's what you're able to bring. Again, you don't have to be policy experts, but you get to share that very key information that they're looking for, so that they can justify their vote. All right, so when you come in as a faith-based advocate in your lobby visit, you're going to want to use your faith or personal values or morality, right? Using your faith or your personal values should, as a basis for your visit, should be considered a strength. You're leading with that place, right? It's also important to note that not every member of your group that is meeting with the representative has to be of the same faith or even of any faith at all, right? There's something very powerful to a fact that there's a group of people coming in, even if they don't all believe the same faith, but they all believe in the same outcome. We're like, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, we do want justice for migrants, or we do want to care for our creation. And we don't share the same faith, but we all believe in these values. And that could be just as powerful as a group that's coming in that's all of the same faith as well. So whether everyone is there or everyone is more diverse in your group, it can be seen as a big strength. Also, when you use your faith, be authentic with it. That's the most attractive and easy faith to share, is the one that's authentic. So, it's not the time to start speaking in tongues or, doing anything like that, but making sure that, you're bringing where your faith truly is, so that you can make that connection with the staffer, with the member, to build that relationship. All right. Next, this is the most powerful tool that we want to share with you all. If you have a tool belt on your visit, this is the #1 tool that you're going to be going to, right? And this is storytelling. What are the stories that you're bringing and you're sharing? Because again, you're not there to be a policy expert. You're there to talk about the policy, but to share it through your lived experience, because that's powerful to them. You can share it from your personal expertise, which is your lived experience. There's a quote from Pope Francis that talks about lived realities being more powerful than ideologies, right? Because we can think about something, but the lived realities of it is a whole different game, and that's what you're able to bring into it. That perspective is new, and it's vital to your senator's office or your representative's office, as we saw in those charts earlier. And the thing is that you can argue about data all the time. We've seen people arguing about data back and forth, about the numbers, how this is going to work, X, Y, and Z, but you can't dispute personal experiences. That's someone sharing a vulnerability that then in turn allows someone else to be vulnerable on staff as well, which creates good connection. So keep in mind your stories as you hear about the talking points and the policy updates on migration, on care for creation. See how those connect to your lived reality, to your experience of your community, of your state, of your personal connections, because those stories are powerful. So as you start hearing those, start developing those. But one thing I will keep in mind, and I will mention about storytelling, is the ethics of storytelling. And if anyone here studies journalism or is getting into that, you'll probably hear a lot about the ethics of storytelling. You want to make sure you have consent about the story that you're going to tell if it's not yours, right? If you're sharing someone else's story, you need the consent of that person to share it. If you're not able to get the consent of someone because it happened years ago and you're not in connection with that person, you want to keep confidentiality on whatever story you're telling, especially if it's about important issues like immigration, like about someone's immigration status, about issues that could be sensitive for folks, making sure that you keep confidentiality of details, but that you share the learnings that come from a story. At Network, when you give resources, when we do workshops, we always tell folks, hey, whatever is shared here stays here, but whatever is learned here should be taken out and shared. And you can think of that with your stories as well, right? Keeping the confidentiality of stories if you don't have consent, and always trying to get that consent so that you're representing people accurately and well. All right, so now we're getting down to the specifics, to the practicals. As you prepare to lobby, again, you're going to want to think about why you are in the room. Why do these issues, why do they matter to you? Why are they important to you and to your community? Topics of migration, topics of the environment. Why are those important to you and your community? Before you even go in, you're going to want to research your member of Congress. Who are you meeting with? Find out where they are, if they're going to be up for election. It's a midterm season coming up, right? Are they someone who's not up for re-election yet? Are they someone who's a senior member, a junior member? How have they voted on this issue previously? That'll give you a good idea. What committees do they sit on, right? Like what power do they have there? Researching your member is important to know so that you can go in feeling prepared as well. You'll have leave behinds and talking points that tell you all about the policies. So it's important to review those so that you feel comfortable enough to talk about it, not as an expert, but at least conversationally. And if you're in a group and you're bringing a group, make sure that you assign roles for the visit, and roles like someone to keep the time, someone to introduce the group, someone to share a story, maybe a second person to share a story, someone to expand on the policy ask. Make sure you really divide out those times and people feel prepared to know when they get to speak, right? It'll help you feel more confident too, when you know everything is kind of planned out with the roles. And then of course, practice your talking points and prepare for a conversation, not just a monologue, but a response that they can give you and how you can respond to what they say. Again, if this is your first time, there could be some obstacles or challenges that can feel like they're a block for you, getting into a meeting with a member for the first time. Sometimes you can feel intimidated by policymakers and their staff. Everyone's in a suit, everyone's dressed really nice. You're in this giant building, you might be there for the first time. There could be difficulty in facing or fear in facing an opposing viewpoint. Maybe your member is someone who doesn't agree with the policies that you're going to be asking with, and that can bring a little bit of fear sometimes or anxiety. Or there could be just a general discouragement with the political system, right? Feeling like nothing can really change. These can be obstacles that if we don't address them before going in, can get in the way sometimes of our conversations. So we want to always keep in mind that, whatever building we go into, no matter how grand and intimidating the Capitol building might look like, or the Russell Senate office might look like, know that we, the people, do own those buildings, that we elect the leaders, and we have a right and a duty to participate in that policymaking process. And it's a great thing that we can do in our country. One of our lobbyists on immigration, Renette, she's from Sri Lanka, and she talks about every time she goes to the Capitol, to one of the Senate offices, she feels so grateful because in Sri Lanka, she doesn't have the same accessibility and transparency to talk to her representatives the way that we have here. And that's something I try to keep in mind all the time as well, to not take that for granted. Also, if you feel like you're worried about hitting an opposing viewpoint by a member, recognize that what wisdom that they can bring in their sharing, Where can you find common ground in your beliefs between them, and recognize that you're not there to win an argument, you're there to build a relationship, and that it can be fine if there's an opposing viewpoint, if you can establish some sort of relationship, which they want to build with you, right? They want to have a relationship with their constituents. So they'll 9 times out of 10, I say 9.5 times out of 10, will be kind, they'll be generous, and you be that back. And if for some reason you get a staffer that is just not having a good day, still extending that grace either way, right? And then, of course, recognizing that even though the system can be tough to deal with and there could be slow change, that we can remember the work that's happened before us that has brought us to where we are now. You can think of something like women's suffrage or the civil rights movement. We are each benefiting from the tireless work of people from generations past that have worked hard and maybe not seen any results in their life, but that we've benefited from, and that we have a chance to participate in that same kind of tradition as well, to add to that list of incremental success and broaden what that can look like. All right, now that we have those over with at the top, let's dive into the specific steps. You're going to dive in and you're going to, right before you start with your meeting, you're going to meet with your team to go over the roles, who's speaking, who's introducing, who's keeping time, who's telling what stories, if we're telling multiple stories, who's making the policy ask. Make sure you silence all distractions when you go in. You don't want to have a phone go off. To make sure it's turned off, I would just say, just to be safe. And when you get to meet with the office, ask the staffer right off the top how much time they have at the start of the meeting. Because sometimes you might have an agreed time to already, and they'll say, hey, yeah, we have 30 minutes. Come on over. Like, we're happy to host you. But then things can happen on the Hill. There could be a vote that's coming out of nowhere or a change, and time could shift. So it's always important to keep that first thing when you meet with them, saying, hey, we had agreed on 30 minutes. Are we still good for that? And then they'll let you know if they need to cut it up, or if they can say, hey, we got all afternoon, we can give you even more time, right? So here's what to expect in the specific steps. You're going to arrive in the meeting order and have some sort of brief introduction where someone can introduce the group, can introduce the individuals, to let the member or the staff person that you're going to be meeting with know that if you're a constituent, maybe what cities you're from, where you're representing, make those connections, right? From there, it's always good to then start with some sort of gratitude, some kind of thanks. It really sets a good tone for the meeting afterwards, saying something positive about the member or the office that you're meeting with. And that's going to require some research. How have they voted on an issue that you're talking about? Hey, thank you for voting on that over the past couple of years. If you're meeting with an office or a member that you just do not agree with and you can't find any overlap, thank them for just representing you. Hey, thank you so much for representing our state, for representing our district out here in the Capitol. We appreciate that. Always want to start off with some kind of gratitude. It makes the conversation go much smoother, right? From there, you can introduce the issues that you're lobbying on. You're going to want to use that faith or moral component, right? Our faith teaches us this. This is what my personal faith has taught me. And you introduce that topic, whether it's on migration or whether it's for care for creation of the environment. At Network, we stress as well framing whatever policies that you're talking about through a racial equity framework, to keep those in mind as well, because we know that not all policies hit all communities the same ways, and oftentimes intentionally so. And then from there, you have a chance to be able to get more information on the member's position. Once you share about where you're coming from and the policy that you're asking for, you get to hear from them. What are their thoughts? What are their actions that they've done so far? What are their plans on that issue, on that specific piece of legislation that you're asking them to act on? And you can get more information as to personally why they have those types of views, or where they get their information from. Again, a good way to be able to receive and build that exchange. Once you get to that first half, you move to the second half, which is the really key piece, where you share a personal story. And this can maybe even be 2 different stories if 2 folks have stories that can connect here. As you tell your story on this issue, again, thank you for telling us about your votes on migration, on a pathway to citizenship. I'd like to share a bit about me, who am a child of an immigrant, someone whose parents crossed the border and wanted to build a better life, wanted to find something, and really were able to provide that. And that's why a pathway to citizenship is so important for us, right? Always connecting it back to the policy ask at the end of your story, no matter who's sharing their story. From there, you can respond to any pushback or concerns. Again, not because you're trying to win an argument, but just so that you can get to better understanding of each other. And then what you're going to want to do is repeat your ask again. I bolded that part because the ask is the most important part that you want to make sure is left clear. When you leave your meeting, what you want them to know more than anything is why you were there, what you were asking them to do. I would like you to support X, Y, or Z. I would like you to oppose X, Y, or Z. What is that ask? Make sure that it is clear, make sure that it's concise, and make sure that it's repeated, right? From there, you can share your leave behind documents, which gives basically a rundown, a summary of everything that you shared already. And then take a photo with the office and then post about it afterwards. The offices love when you're able to share that with out in public as well. A couple of tips during your meeting. You can ask for the staff member's email address, whoever you're meeting with, again, to build relationship. Ask how you can support them as they're moving forward. When they're going to be hosting a town hall or having an in-district recess. So being like, hey, it was great seeing you here in DC. I'd love to see you back in our home state or in our home district. And if there's anything else that the staff member needs a follow-up, maybe the conversation brought up some questions and maybe you didn't have the answer for it then, but you can be like, I'm going to follow up with you. So I'll get you this information later. And a couple of other pro tips that we recommend, avoiding direct antagonism in your criticism, right? So again, there could be a conversation about someone that does not agree with your policy ask. It is okay to criticize maybe the voting record of a member, right? Something, hey, this vote really actually hurts my community because of X, Y, and Z, or it hurts our environment and we want to be able to take care of our beautiful parks and of our wildlife and of our ecosystem. And those votes, frankly, hurt our environment, right? It's okay to antagonize maybe a vote, but you don't ever want to antagonize a person. We don't want to have any personal criticism. Being polite, but yet firm when you explain your positions and your proposed solutions. Not being afraid to say, I don't know, or can I get back to you? Again, you're not there to be a policy expert. You're there to share your personal expertise and your stories. And if you say, I can circle back with you, that gives you a good opportunity to build relationship again, right? And then, of course, making sure that your ask is clear, concise, and repeated so that when you leave, they know, I know exactly why the school was here because they wanted me to vote this way, right? Make sure that is very clear. Once you finish with your meeting, congratulations, give yourself a round of applause, pat on the back. You all did amazing. If it was your first time, congratulations. And then you could do a little bit of debrief with your group. What went well? What did we hear? What were some things that were shared that were new insights? What did we learn? You're going to want to assign someone to send an email to the staffer within 24 hours of that meeting. A thank you. Hey, thank you once again for meeting with us. We really enjoyed the conversation. As promised, we're sharing this leave behind document again from what we talked about earlier. Make sure to include any of that information that you promised to send, share any photos that you took, and tag that member on social media. Maybe you'll get a reshare as well. And if you have any lobby report back forms to fill out, whether for ISN or so, make sure to complete those as well and send those in. But that basically gives you a rundown of what to expect during a lobby visit. Obviously, it was a lot to go through right now, right? A lot of pieces that we're all kind of throwing at you together, but again, we're going to have other advocacy trainings throughout the weekend that we'll be able to prep you for. Using your planning document will be a very helpful tool to be able to do that. And making sure that your roles are assigned is also a good way to be able to make sure that you feel prepared for whatever your piece is going to be. But with that, that was a little bit of the general idea. And before we actually get into any questions, I would like to then pass it over to James to share a little bit of the delegation leader perspective of what it actually looks like when you're there and you're prepping and you're meeting with the office. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Colin. I love that presentation, and you know, it really, I think, supports a lot of what you know, I think we're going for when we think about being delegate leaders for these advocacy visits. I can remember my very first time going to an advocacy visit and feeling so nervous. I was fresh out of college. I was working with network, and I felt like I needed to know everything. I felt like I needed to have hard data to back me up. I felt like I needed to be able to, the same way that a big expensive lobbyist would say like, hey, we're gonna, help your opponent in the next election. I felt like I needed to be able to do that. And I wonder sometimes too, if some of my students, if they walking into some of these advocacy visits, feel some of the same things. And so as a delegate leader, my perspective is first and foremost focused on making sure that this is a good experience of advocacy for them. And so what does that mean? I think that that means that it's going to want to keep them engaged in the work of advocacy. An image from last year's teach-in that I continue to pray with and continue to think about as we do this work of advocacy together was presented by Father Brian Massengale. He talked about how many of the issues that we're encountering and talking about, it's kind of like a relay race where that somebody is going to cross the finish line someday. That's what Christian hope is all about, right? That somehow God is going to make this all right, even if we don't know how. But it might not be me that gets to cross the finish line, but my part still matters. My part still really matters. And so as I'm thinking about preparing my own students, some of whom are gung-ho, they're really excited to go to the advocacy visit. I had a freshman, he came in and signed up thinking about the advocacy being the main reason why he wants to go to the teach-in. I was blown away. But at the same time, I also have a number of students who are still not entirely sure what they're going to be getting from the teach-in. And so I think being able to make this a positive experience of this is important what we're doing. This ask matters. Going to our offices and showing that people of faith care about these issues, and we show up. We show up to vote. We show up to rally. We show up to ask for these things. For me, I think that's the most important thing that I can do for my students is help them to have a positive experience. So the easiest way I think to do that is to do everything that Colin just said, to keep our delegates, to prepare them well, to know that this is what the visit is going to be like, to keep them focused on the different roles. I'm going to be bringing 19 students from my school, and some of them are going to be more equipped to participate in the visit simply because they've had an experience of visiting the border, and so they have a story to share. So although some of your delegates might not be sharing in a speaking role in some of their visits, that's okay. The fact that they're there, the fact that they're a body standing in the room, the fact that they're able to show with their enthusiasm that they care about this, that matters. And I think our delegates need to know that too as they're preparing, that everyone who's coming to these visits, you matter. You matter as you're sharing, even if you're not sharing a story, even if you're not sharing a talking point, being in the room, that's a signal that, hey, this matters to my community and where we're coming from. So, Colin mentioned a lot about stories. I think being able to prep your group and being able to have conversations with them, okay, we're going to go have this meeting. And they're going to want to hear from us things that are personal, that really matter. Who has that? Who's bringing that? You might be surprised by the stories that some people are going to be bringing. And you might need to do the work as a delegate leader to help polish and shape and redirect some of those stories or passion. I think also one thing that I've encountered in the past is many of the reasons that my students are going to be coming to the teach-in, I'm sure it's true for you, go beyond the 2 issue asks that we're going to be sharing with our members of Congress. But it's still important to, in order to have a good visit, keep our students focused on those particular asks. That doesn't mean, though, that the issues that they care about don't matter. And in fact, what I like to do is to tell my students, like, hey, this is important. We ought to be lobbying on this too. But we don't want it to distract from this particular issue today. And guess what? This is just the beginning of a conversation. This is just the beginning of a conversation. We're going to follow up with this office, and there may even be opportunities in the future where we're able to do our own advocacy, whether it's a letter writing campaign or our own visit to the district office. So those are some of the things that I tend to encounter is nervousness, wanting to talk about other issues, just everyone wanting to have a part in the meeting. And I imagine that's pretty similar for a lot of folks who have done some of these visits before too. At the end of the day, I think that if our students have had a positive experience of an advocacy visit, then they're in the game and they realize, hey, I can play in the game too. And it's not just, politics isn't just happening around me, and it's not divorced from my faith. It's not divorced from what matters to me. And if we do that, then we're building a movement. We're not just getting an ask here or there. We're building a movement. So that's my perspective. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks to both of you. Unless there are other pieces that I've forgotten, I'm going to open it up for questions now. The other thing I'm going to share in the chat is a document that we have. It's a meeting planner. It's just to support you and your group as you think about the different pieces and speaking parts, especially within your meeting, that you can use that sort of to guide your planning. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, go ahead, either drop them in the chat or go ahead and unmute and you can ask them for James and Colin. I did get a few questions in the chat about meetings for folks who are in California, New York, and Ohio, which have a little bit of a different process for scheduling. And I might actually turn things to Jorge for an update. I know that that can be a challenging process, and I think some are still in flux, but I'm not sure, Jorge, if you have more concrete updates that you could share with folks.
Yeah, so as meetings have begun to be scheduled, I've slowly been reaching out to members of the delegations from the various states, right? So folks from Ohio have heard from me, should have heard from me by now, especially if you've confirmed that you're going to be participating in Advocacy Day. I have emailed the delegations from New York and from Ohio. I heard back yesterday afternoon from one of the offices from New York, so we'll hopefully have a time set with them. One of the offices from California is not going to meet in person at all. Their office is still fully virtual as far as their meetings with folks outside of Congress. So, we're focusing all of our attention on the other office. That's the office of Senator Feinstein. I'm really just waiting to hear back from them to, set a time. They know our parameters, and as far as like, they know more or less to expect the number of people that we've had in previous years. So we're just waiting on them to let us know where to meet them and at what time. And I know that situation's a little bit more complicated because of post-COVID, we have to have a space with enough people. So as soon as we have those details figured out, I will be reaching out to the delegation from California. And hopefully tomorrow I will be able to share information with the delegations from New York also with that information for the meeting that I have. Yeah, we're trying to, schedule all of these meetings. And it really just depends on where the offices are at. I know I said that one of the offices from California is not meeting in person. So there is like a possibility of delegations that are interested in possibly doing something virtually post teach-in, and I would love to help facilitate that if there's interest. But as of right now, we're just going to focus on the other office.
Awesome. Thanks, Jorge. So then just as a reminder, I don't need to confuse folks. That's just for the states of Ohio, New York, and California. It's really just due to the number of delegations of people we have from those states that we take on the scheduling of those. for folks who are outside of those states, it's your responsibility to schedule meetings. But if you have any questions about that process or are running into difficulties, you can go ahead and reach out to us. We're happy to give guidance where we're able. Were there any other questions before we wrap up here?
I have a question. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Colin, James, Jorge, and Aaron for putting this together. It's really helpful. For Jorge, if it is in Feinstein's office, would that be something where all of us would be together, or it'd be like scheduled or tiered, or what does that look like when there's so many people? Curious.
This is my first year scheduling these meetings, so I'm kind of following the precedent that we've set in past years. Those meetings are a little bit complicated. Normally we like to have everyone in the room, but it may, just depending on the number of institutions, right? If we're 7 or 8 delegations that each have 8 to 20 something students, it might only make sense for one student from each delegation to have a role in the actual speaking. And that's one of those things that as soon as we have the meetings scheduled, I will email this out and we'll start to slowly put together who do we want to be speaking in from our delegation, from each delegation. And if somebody's particularly passionate about ecological justice, it might make sense for them to share a personal story, or maybe they're better suited with the facts. We have someone that's just knows a lot about immigration policy, or someone that is just really informed about the facts. They might serve in the role of helping with that portion, or just maybe we have a student that's or a delegation member that's particularly charismatic, and it might make sense for them to help introduce each delegation and move us from one portion to the next, right? To introduce immigration and then introduce each of the people that will be speaking. In that regards, that's what we've done in the past, and I think that's what we'll do this time around also. I'm down to get creative, but I also want to make sure that every school feels equally represented. All of our delegations feel equally represented, and I know that can be a little bit more difficult. And that's also why we only do this with Senate meetings. If each school gets to represent their House of Rep member, then that's going to be an opportunity for especially smaller delegations to still have a little bit more intimate of a meeting with a congressperson's office in DC. I hope that answered your question. I'm so sorry if I rambled there.
If I can add something too, Jorge, my experience having been a part of one of these larger meetings, being from Ohio, it's actually really, I thought it was very cool. It made for some great photos too, to be in a room with the one representative from Senator Portman's office, and then there's 55 other people, a few 12 at the table, but surrounding the room. And to be able to say hey, this is just a small fraction of the entire, that there are 2,000 plus people attending the Ignatian Family Teach-in and participating in this advocacy. This gives you a scope of just a little bit of that, right? Although you do have to, my experience as a delegate leader, having to make some difficult decisions, it'd be you're both going to do such a great job, but we really we really only have one role that we're able to offer, but it's because this is a team sport, right? We're doing this together. I don't look forward to having to do that, to pick who's going to represent my group, but still they will, I think really appreciate, and you get to go to some of these really cool buildings, cool rooms that are reserved for large groups, and to be able to just be there and see wow, this is cool. There are 55 of us, there are 100 of us meeting to speak about this important issue. So I hope that perspective is encouraging.
Thanks all. Any last questions? So just to reiterate, we'll send out this recording at the end of the week along with the policy briefings for migration and ecology, which will take place ecology tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern and migration on Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. So I would encourage folks to take a look at that backgrounder and the talking points ahead of time. And they might, raise some questions that you can ask the policy experts who will be with us over the next couple of days. But thanks all so much for being here, and many thanks to Colin and James for all your work in preparing for this. See y'all soon.